Good afternoon. I have the honor of welcoming and introducing Dr. Sharon Glazer, our speaker for this afternoon. Dr. Glazer is a professor and chair of the Division of Applied Behavioral Sciences at the University of Baltimore. At UB, she is also the program director for the new Global IO Psychology Certificate and the local coordinator for the Erasmus Plus Masters in Work, Organizational, and Personnel Psychology program, which is in collaboration with the European Consortium headquartered in the University of Valencia. She has over 25 years of teaching, consulting, and research experience with expertise in cross-cultural issues and occupational stress. Her research has been supported by several external and internal grants, most notably Fulbright, Erasmus Mundus, and NASA. Dr. Glazer is currently a co-editor of the monograph series on culture, organizations, and work published by Springer, as well as a new Springer book series, Emerging Cultural Perspectives in Work, Organizational, and Personnel Studies, which was launched in 2019. So if you would join me in welcoming Dr. Glazer.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me here today for this, I think, third President's Symposium, is that right? To institutionalize the core values. To give you a little bit of background about myself, I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, IO psychology, otherwise known as in and out. I'm just kidding. If you don't remember IO psychology, you can say IO, it's off to work we go. We study human behavior in the workplace. We try to create alignment in the organization. We focus on personnel selection. We focus on motivation. My area of specialty is occupational stress across cultures. And we focus on leadership. And so you might be wondering, how am I here to talk about culture and climate? It's because the organization's culture influences the kind of experiences people have in the workplace, whether they are experiencing a healthy work climate. Are they experiencing an entrepreneurial climate? Are they experiencing values that align with their own personal values? And my work in organizational psychology, cross-cultural issues, and occupational stress focused first and foremost on value fit, making sure that people in the workplace have values that align with the workplace. And when there is misfit, what happens? And so we try to create some interventions that will enable the organization to thrive and be successful. Most of my research began in the world of nursing. So I have a soft spot for the medical community. I collected data on nurses in 5 countries for my PhD, for my dissertation. And then I went on to collect data in Japan and Brazil, in New Zealand. And I have a current effort with Spain and Germany looking at healthcare providers and looking at values, occupational stress across cultures. Okay, so we'll start off with an exercise. We were just ad-libbing of what we're going to do with this exercise that I'm having you support the President's Symposium students, thinking about your experiences here at UMB. We're going to talk about the objectives, which basically are to understand culture and climate, define those concepts, identify the climate, help you develop some toolkits for identifying the organization's climate and culture, and present some principles for sustaining the core values of the institution. So here's the exercise. How many of you have some writing utensil, like a pen, a crayon, blood sample, whatever you know, and paper? If you don't mind taking that out and sharing the results of what you write down with the students who are on the President's Symposium, that would be very helpful, because they're supposed to write a white paper next semester, and it would be helpful for them to have some data to guide what they are thinking about. I see a lot of sharing going on. You have a paper. You don't have to give it back to the person later, just to the President's Symposium folks. Okay, so as you're fumbling for your pen, your pencil, blood sample, whatever you like, and your paper, what I'd like for you to do is jot down on this piece of paper, what is your organization's purpose? And by your organization, I mean this institution, this University of Maryland, Baltimore. What is your organization's purpose? Take a couple minutes to just jot down your thoughts. Those of you on staff, feel free to do the same because you are part of the culture. Is that Courtney? That means you too. You're part of this culture, so feel free to share as well with the students. It's helpful. You don't need to write your name. No one's going to contact you later. It's all anonymous. What is your organization's purpose? If you could put a number 1, because that's the first question. Number 2, what is your organization's performance management system like? And you're thinking, we're not employees. But how many of you are evaluated in the classroom? How many of you have faculty who are talking about you behind your back to determine whether or not you are professionally developing your skills? We talk about, so faculty talk about students. Are they developing? Do we need to provide more coaching? Maybe that's not what happens at UMB, but I'm pretty confident it does. We want to graduate the best and the brightest. So what is this performance management system like? How are you evaluated? How are you rewarded? Tears. Survival. Number 3, what makes you proud to be a student here? And if you're not a student here, what makes you proud to be here as an employee, a volunteer, a patient, a client, a parent? Number 4, I'm not presenting on the slides, but the question is, what makes you not so proud to be a student here? Or staff member, or faculty, client, patient, or parent? What is not so prideful being here? Number 5, how are you making a difference here at UMB through your relationship with the university? We come to a university expecting a lot from the administration, from our faculty, from financial aid. We have a lot of expectations, but we're part of that relationship. It's not a one-way street. So what are we doing as students to make a difference through our relationship with the university? I'm probably speaking to the choir here because you are all doing something that is connecting you to this university. And since this was not planned, I don't have an elegant way of collecting everything. It wasn't a master plan coming in that I'll do this. I'd like to ask if Courtney, could you collect? She'll walk by covering her eyes so she won't see who's writing what, who's written what. Thank you, Courtney. So Courtney will collect your responses and give it to the President's Fellows. This will be very helpful for them as they think about the culture component to what you've all written as your experiences. Throughout today's session, what I want you to do is think about these experiences as we go through the rest of the discussion of the values of UMB, the core mission and goals. Okay, so our objectives for today is 1, to define culture and climate, And two, help you have some tools to identify factors that represent your climate and the culture that reinforces that climate. Let's start with the definition of organizational climate. How many of you have heard, before I go into this definition, the word values used during these symposia? Values are thrown around, right? What are values? It should be a mantra. Guiding principles in life, right? You've learned that over and over again, guiding principles in life. They are what we desire. We do not have them. It is what we strive to achieve. The United States Constitution, we have our values. We strive for happiness, pursuit of happiness and freedom, and we strive to have equality. We don't have all of those things yet. We strive for them. These are our values. When you think about organizational culture, I heard that term used as well during Dr. Augustine's presentation. He threw around the word culture, because values are part of culture. But I haven't heard, and maybe I wasn't listening carefully enough, but I hadn't heard anyone speak about organizational climate. And the organizational climate is really that slice, that snapshot moment, like someone taking a photo and capturing the image at a single point in time of how direct stakeholders, like yourselves as students, staff, faculty, clients, patients, patient families, the people around the community of Baltimore, how are all these stakeholders experiencing the organization and feeling in the organization? This reflects the what. What are you perceiving? How are you perceiving the practices of the organization? They may be written, but your experience of them may not fully align with the intention of them. What are the policies that you believe to be true that you're practicing and following? What are the procedures, protocols you have to follow? And what are the reward structures? These all define climate. I call it the 3 Ps and R for anyone who wants to have a little abbreviation. Practices, policies, procedures, and reward structures or systems. This includes what you believe people expect of you. It includes what you believe you are supported to do, how you're reinforced, and how the organization endorses your behaviors, your practicing and following protocol. In contrast, the culture is the social glue. It gives meaning to how you are experiencing the what you experience. When a 3-year-old has a messy room or a 4-year-old has a messy room, the parents say to them, clean your room. And the child, why? And you have to explain why. That answer, why, is the social glue. It gives meaning to them. They start to understand the culture and the value of cleanliness by instilling it to them early in life. The organization members of an organizational culture will share in the meaning that is given to the experience. So as I said before, the organization culture actually represents the why. Why do we practice what we practice? Why do we why do we follow protocol the way we follow it? Why are we rewarding people or punishing people the way we are? These are your values and beliefs that are maintained by the organization's leadership. They reward you, they support you, they provide the answers to why they do what they do. I keep wanting to go behind the podium to click next, and then I remember I have the clicker, so. Does this look familiar to anybody? Missing half of it, right? It'll pop up in a moment. Here you have the organization's, what I call the strategic goals for UMB, the vision that it holds for the institution. First and foremost, the goal is to improve the human condition. You serve the public good, fuel the knowledge economy, you are an anchor institution in Baltimore. And I was stuck on global impact because it says from bench to bedside, and I thought, that's odd. Not everyone is studying medicine here. But then I thought of it from a broader perspective a global impact is from beginning to end of your relationship, and hopefully there isn't an end because that's one of the next components of the vision. From the moment you apply to UMB to the moment you graduate and become an alum of UMB, it is from bench to bedside. It is your total experience. So it's a holistic experience. So I didn't take those words literally, and so maybe that's something to consider as you go through your white papers. Do we want to take that? How literally do we want to take that? There's no place like home. Click 3 times, you'll get back to Kansas. But right now, we're in Baltimore. There's no place like home. It's important for UMB that you feel at home, even if you're not from Baltimore. And the next 3 are all about innovation and entrepreneurial spirit that is important to this institution, and reminding everyone that we have a history of excellence, and you are currently in the making of the new history for the future. So now I have a few more questions for you. You don't have to write this one down. Just think about it. Do you feel, and how are you, supported in serving the public good? Are there any times where you're feeling that you're not supported or that more support could be given? Do you feel that your voices are heard when your study conditions are not as you really want them to be? Or you're boasting because they're better than you ever anticipated? Do you feel that you have room to innovate? Are you comfortable with your peers and your superiors? Do you have an opportunity to connect what you've learned in the classroom didactically or experientially with developing your competencies as a professional? Do you feel support from peers and supervisors and organization? Is there anything impeding your ability to study? Is there anything impeding you from publicizing your work? These are the kinds of questions that help us start unraveling what is the organization's climate? What are the practices, the policies, the procedures, the reward systems? These basically become the artifacts that we start to investigate, and we need to dig deeper to understand why those artifacts exist as they exist. So here we try to understand truly what is the organization's culture. The organization may have those pillars, but is the organization practicing what it says it values? And you can try to discover if it is truly practicing what it says it values by asking those questions. Am I given an opportunity to innovate? Am I given an opportunity to stay close to UMB? When you graduate, do you keep the UMB email address to stay home, to keep your connection to home? UMB, it sounds to me, when I read the material and literature that Courtney shared with me, that it strives to have a climate for well-being, a climate for excellence, a climate for innovation, a climate for safety, and a climate for service. And something you need to know that these climates can be conflicting with each other. We strive to have a climate for innovation and at the same time a climate for safety. Well, how can we innovate and yet be safe at the same time? Climates are snapshot momentary pictures of what is happening in any unit within an organization. You might not want innovation when it's dealing with administering a new drug to somebody that has a bunch of allergies. You might want to be very risk averse during that time. But when it comes to, is this the right medicine? Let's innovate, let's do some more research behind it, and let's investigate whether the medication that we're supplying is the appropriate one. So your climates can conflict sometimes, and you have to determine which rises above the others. And what are the reward systems, what are the practices, the policies that continue to reinforce them? So when thinking about your university, what comes to mind from the day-to-day practices, when you walk the halls, when you look for signs, when you look for people, when you look for guidance, when you want to get feedback on your work, when you want to connect with people, what are your day-to-day practices like? That will start to give us an idea of your climate. What are the written and unwritten policies? I often, in IO psychology, tell my students, it's not just what's written that you need to look into. You need to look at what's not written. What are people doing that is not written? We had, the best people to know it are the new people, by the way. The brand new people on the block are the ones to notice all the problems. Listen to them. They can figure out a lot of issues that are coming about. The general procedures, what are the day-to-day procedures you have to go through? How did we have to, we were standing outside trying to figure out how do we get in, and we just waited. Someone kind enough came and opened the door for us, and that was nice. But what are the general procedures for anything that you have to do in the organization? And again, the reward system. How are you punished? How are you rewarded? When are you rewarded? Think about when you're identifying the whats. Think about how you are given an opportunity to grow and develop. Are you given free rein? Is it blocked in? Or is it, do you have total freedom of innovation? When I applied to work on my PhD at another institute, not in Maryland, but I won't name it because I don't want to give you too much work of editing things out. As soon as the advisor of this institution said to me, we don't allow you to think innovatively of what you want to study. We give you the topic, and that's what you study. Tore up my application. I'm not going there. It was my #1 choice school until I heard that, and I tore it up, the application up. So what are the growth and development opportunities? What is reinforced? What is supported? If you work in teams, how are the teams formed? How many of you had to work in your classes in teams? Right? It's really for the professor. They don't want to grade so much. No, but it's also because that's the real world. You're constantly working in teams. You need to know how to deal with people. I'm sure you have some classes where your professors randomly assign you together, and you have some classes where you get to choose who you work with. What is the climate the professor is trying to establish? Had I had perfect free rein in this auditorium, which I didn't ask because I watched the other 2 symposium, and this is the setup of the chairs. This is not how I like to set up chairs, personally. I like to set it up in a circle. My classes are always held in circles. What tone does that set? Equal, community. Say it again? You can see each other. Right now, all you see are people's heads. I get to see you, but that's not fair. You should see each other. It's really beautiful faces out here, and you don't get to enjoy listening and watching, and some people are falling asleep, and only I get to see that. You don't. So if you work in teams, how are these teams formed, and what do they mean? What do they represent? What is the infrastructure like? The communication infrastructure. The technology systems. Do you have access to 24/7 Zoom so you can work with people across the country or around the world? What is the style of communication? How many of you have to call your professors Dr. So-and-so? Okay? And some of your professors will say, call me by my first name. It's kind of confusing. We like to keep it exciting. My students will call me Dr. Glazer, but I prefer they call me Sharon, and they can't get it out of their systems. But I sign off always with my first name. So what is the style of communication? What is the expectation of relationship and structure in these communications? And again, I'm going to reinforce here. How are you rewarded? For what are you rewarded? Are you rewarded for getting a big grant? Are you rewarded for discovering some protocol that was broken that could be problematic in the organization system? Who are the rewards to? When a faculty member is a PI, a principal investigator on a project, is it only the PI that gets acknowledged, or all the students who helped the PI, or all the staff members who helped coordinate it also given acknowledgement? When are they given the acknowledgement? 12 months later or 4 weeks later? How quickly is that acknowledgement coming out? That all informs the organization's culture and climate. So when we talk about organizational climate, we're really looking at as you notice, I kept on saying you, what are you feeling? We look at the individual. We ask the individuals within the institution, what are your experiences like? We then, as analysts, as researchers, will look at how homogeneous are the responses. If all of you on a 1 to 4 scale say, we believe that the organization, well, let me not try to make it up. Here we go. Number 4. We all in the organization are rewarded for good ideas. New ideas are accepted. Most of you give it a rating of 3 or 4. That means we have a tight, homogeneous climate for innovation. If any of you are methodologists, you know that 1 item is not enough. Let's go with it for now, just for sake of example. If, however, people generally rate new ideas are readily accepted here as 1 or 2, you still have a tight culture, or rather a tight climate, but you're in the direction that maybe is not desired. Now, what happens if people are all over the place? Some people say 1, give a rating of 2, some give a rating of 3, some give a rating of 4. You have heterogeneity. Also potentially problematic, because if your goal is to have a climate for innovation, you don't want heterogeneity. You want homogeneity toward the upper ends, toward the 3 and 4s. Another example, there is a strong sense of where the institution is going. That's a climate for organizational clarity. If I ask people, do you know where the institution is going? You'll all probably say, yeah. And then I ask you, so where are you going? I don't know. I do this on a regular basis when I do consulting for organizations. You know what your goals are? Sure we do. Okay, what are they? Oh, didn't expect you to ask that one. Okay, so people might say there's a strong sense of knowledge of where the institution is going, a rating of 3 or 4. That means they're strong in the same understanding. 1 and 2 means you're tight in not understanding. And of course, all over the place, 1 through 4 is also a problem. It's too loose. We need to sharpen our understanding of where the organization is going. These are just some examples of climate items. I put together a compendium of nearly 1,000 items on organizational climate. It's too much, but there are a lot of people doing climate research. As we said before, the organization's culture is about explaining the why, the what's happen. Culture is much more enduring than climate. Culture is passed down from generation to generation. It lasts a long time. If you think about this metaphor of the iceberg, what you see at the top are the corporate language or the USM language. How many of you had to learn new abbreviations here, right? And now that's all you speak about with your family, and your family is, I don't understand you, you're talking abbreviations to me. The organization structure and technology, all of these are the observable components of an organization like an iceberg, but that's much smaller and more compact than the bottom. I don't know if you can see very well, but you can see an iceberg has a much deeper part to it than what you actually see at the top. And what you don't see underneath the surface of the water are those beliefs, the attitudes, the norms, the values that people hold that explain why the stories are told the way they're told, why the university uses the acronyms and abbreviations that it uses. So I'm going to throw out the question to see if you're paying attention to me. What do we discover by analyzing the invisible part of culture? The President's Symposium. Student got it, thank you. So we get to understand the why. Culture has these components: values, beliefs, assumptions, attitudes that are shared and learned by a group of people. A group of people will have to learn it. A group of people will have to share them. If they don't share these, the values or the beliefs, then it's not a culture. It also occurs over a period of time. Remember I said that the climate is a snapshot moment? A culture is much more enduring and long-term. It is not a snapshot moment. It's not something you can easily change on a dime. It is enduring. Your pillars, your values that Dr. Perman talked about a couple sessions ago that I heard him speak of, that they weren't built and developed in a vacuum. They may have come to be formalized 10 years ago, if I heard correctly. But it doesn't mean that they weren't enacted in some fashion all along the way. People have been working toward them, and they continue to work toward them. It's over a period of time, and it's taken for granted by those who are within it. If, like a fish out in water, you don't realize your culture until you're out of the water and you realize, I need that water to survive. That's how culture is. We take it for granted. How many of you remember your feeling or not feeling a sense of security before 9/11, even thinking about the concept of security? Most of us, right? Did you think about security before 9/11? No, no one cared about it. Go to the movies, I go to the movies, I'm not worried. After 9/11, the world for Americans changed drastically. We suddenly started worrying about security. We valued it suddenly where we didn't value it before. So values are those things that we strive to achieve. We in the United States, we're continuing still to strive for security because we don't feel that we have it anymore. Again, the culture explains why. Why do people act the way they do? Why do people follow policies and practices the way they do? Why are certain rewards distributed? And I'm going to use another metaphor, the onion model. The onion model basically says, when you look at this onion, when you look at an onion, you know it's an onion. You can see on the outside of it what it is. But it's only when you open it, slice it open, that you can actually see if it's a fresh onion or if it's not. And sometimes you know that feeling where you cut it and you're like, oh, it's disastrous inside, and that's the only one you had, and your chicken was cut up, you're ready to cook, and you can't. So we think about the onion as something that we can peel the layers off of. We see the artifacts, like the tip of that iceberg. We see the organization's practices, the organization's language, the pictures around the organization. And we start to peel the layers to understand, what does the organization value? What is important? What are the guiding principles in the organization that give rise to those artifacts? And then what are the assumptions, the beliefs that people hold dearly that would motivate the kind of values? As an example, an artifact. I'm an outsider looking in. I see that you have a President's Symposium series. You have this. Why? What is it that your president and your leadership values? Well, clearly your leadership values collaboration, values knowledge, values leadership, believes in the students. And the belief in the students is clear because of the practices. The students, as stakeholders, it is believed, will help the organization grow. If the president didn't think that you'd help the organization grow, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't have these activities. You wouldn't have a leadership program on campus for all of you. It's because the president believes and the leadership of the organization believes that you are the future of this institution, and believes that through collaboration, knowledge, and leadership and guidance, you will be able to provide the institution the kind of information it needs to grow and flourish. He's created this symposium. So you can see how we can unpackage the layer of the onions, peel back each layer of the onion, but we can also create and build the onion. If I know that, if I believe that students want to learn, then I will, and I believe that the students who learn, who apply themselves will succeed, then I will give, my value is to give challenging exams. If I give challenging exams, my students, the artifact will be A's because they rose to the occasion. Okay, so just, you can build up and down. By now you know the organization's climate are the artifacts, the what's, the practices, policies, procedures, and hopefully this looks familiar to you. Earlier I had asked you to think about what are your growth and development opportunities, how are teams coordinated, your communication systems coordinated. The next activity for those in the President's Symposium who are working on their white paper is to ask the question, why? Why do we have or do not have the kind of growth opportunities and development opportunities we desire? Why do we create the teams the way we create it? Why was the symposium, how are the 7 students selected for this symposium series? Why did they choose to participate? Why were they the ones who were chosen? So the question why, like a 3-year-old, has to be the constant question. That's how you start to determine what the organization's culture is. Does this look familiar for some of you? No, but for all of you. So here I want to ask you, these are the values, the core values of the organization. What are some visible artifacts that demonstrate the value of excellence? What are some visible artifacts that demonstrate that leadership is important? Let's use that one as an example. What is something that shows that leadership is important? All of you are here, so this should be an easy one. For some of you, President's Symposium. For others of you, what? Course credit? No. Okay. Some of you, you have this leadership program, right? What is it called? Yes. PSLI. I do. So we have PSLI, and so all of you, many of you are participating in that. That demonstrates the importance of excellence in leadership. What are some artifacts associated with civility? Are you given an opportunity to support the community around you and be given rewards and accolades for doing that? It all has to work together. So how do UMB's core values support UMB's strategic goals? How do UMB's strategic goals come to life through the practices and policies and procedures and reward systems? Those are questions I'm going to leave you with. You're not going to answer them here. It'll take a little bit of time. And so I'm going to challenge all of you to think about how do the values on the left align with the organization's strategic mission goals. Can you align all of them in some way? And where do they not align? To sustain core values, I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier. You must have an interdependent relationship. It must be the person, you all, and the institution working together. You cannot be in silos. You have to be interdependent, working together. Leaders are responsible for providing opportunities to fulfill goals. Had the PLSI, what is it called? That one, not existed. Had the President's Symposium not existed, you would not be able to voice as easily your ideas and your thoughts. So these exist. Your leaders provided this opportunity because they want your voice. So the leaders are responsible for providing opportunities. You also need to make sure that each of you is very clearly aware of your roles. You need to allow the president and others in leadership need to allow for you to make revolutionary breakthroughs and not be afraid of what they may identify and learn. If the organization is being too risk averse, maybe it needs to make some modifications. If the organization is too risk-taking, maybe it needs to make some modifications there as well. And finally, the organization needs to enable you to attain the values. So to reinforce a climate that achieves your goals, there needs to be alignment between these components. Your role and the organization's goals. There needs to be alignment between your values and the organization's values. There needs to be alignment between the resources and the task to be fulfilled. If this leadership acronym, wasn't credit-bearing, would you be participating in it? I'm going to guess a few people would not. A lot of you would, because you're all good people. The President's Symposium as well. There is a motivation. There is a task to be fulfilled, and you're given some resources. You're given speakers. You're given support by wonderful staff. Those are important resources. We need to align the practices and procedures with your personal growth, your ideals for growth. Where do you want to go? What is it you want to achieve? And finally, your personal experiences in the organization should drive the interventions and organizational changes just as much as the interventions and the organizational changes that occur should change the kind of experiences that you have at the institution. So hopefully in the 45, 50 minutes that I'm here talking with you, you have a clear idea that an organizational climate is the individual level perception of what are you experiencing now, what the person is experiencing now. It's locally created. You can have multiple climates. Every division, every unit will have its own kind of climate at any given moment. An organization's culture is enduring. It explains the why. Why does this happen? If I want to understand an organization's culture, I cannot look at it alone. I have to compare it to other organizations' cultures. If I want to understand UMB's culture, I might look at University of Maryland College Park's culture in comparison to Stanford's culture, Johns Hopkins' culture, Harvard's culture. We need to compare it to others. It can't be looked at alone. And values define the culture. The values that you're all trying to work to sustain can influence the climate, but if you want to sustain those values to be strong pillars, you have to be able to determine whether they are aligned at all stages of behaviors, experiences, rewards, practices, policies, procedures. Are there any questions?
How do you apply the principles you've reviewed in order to create a high-performing team?
So a high-performing team, it depends. I'm a psychologist, so everything depends. Okay, so let's make that one. Every answer will start with it depends. So it depends on what project you're working on. Are you working on a short-term project? Are you working on a long-term project? Will impact whether or not you want people who have same values or slightly different values. It is healthy, very healthy, to have differing values at the individual level. It's not as easy for an organization, for a team to flourish if the values are extraordinarily broad and differentiating. You develop conflict. But there are 4 basic stages to team formation, right. And through the stage of storming, you start to.
Norming, yeah. But how do you establish those ground rules effectively for a 4-year project?
Yeah.
How do you, because it's a global team, 20 plus people. How do you ensure, because everyone doesn't have, we all create teams differently. I've learned a very structured approach from engineering, but everyone else hasn't. So how do you invite everyone to participate without seeming rigid, but because, like you said, everyone doesn't understand the storming, norming
right.
phases of effective,
A major key, because I do look at this cross-culturally. I do have, my students work with students in Spain, and so we're putting them in teams oftentimes, actually every time. And one of the biggest challenges they have is communicating expectations and timing. Time is one of the hardest things for people to coordinate. What is on time? What does on time mean for you is very different than what on time means for others. So what I do, so I'm speaking personally, again, because it all depends on the circumstance. What I do with my classes, with these global virtual team projects, is I have the students communicate what they understand the goals to be, what they understand their roles to be, where they can best contribute to the completion of a project, where their strengths are. Not everyone is a strong writer, but some people are stronger researchers, some people are better presenters, finding out what each roles are, finding out operationalizing what timeliness means. For the Spanish students, oftentimes timeliness means at midnight when it's due by midnight. Whereas for my US students, timeliness means the day before with some wiggle room for error. So you have to have those conversations to be an effective team player. It depends, really, it depends. So we need to have a separate conversation perhaps on what circumstance you're addressing.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Thank you.
The campus has issued a survey to assess the campus climate for diversity for students, as well as another survey to assess the climate for diversity for faculty and staff. I wonder if there's any additional considerations you think we should keep in mind when talking about assessing, understanding, and impacting the climate for diversity.
I haven't seen the diversity climate measure, so it's very difficult for me to answer that. If you're taking an off-the-shelf measure, that's not something I do. I usually custom develop a measure based on the needs of the organization, because diversity means many things. It could be the skin color, it could be religion, it could be socioeconomic status, it could be veteran status, it could be educational opportunities, national differences. So I don't know what's in the survey, and I don't know if the surveys for the students and the faculty and staff are asking the same kind of questions. I think it would be interesting to look at that variance. So one of the downfalls of many organizations in trying to understand their climate for, in this case, diversity, is that they look at a mean score. The mean score is meaningless. Do not look at the average. You need to look at the variance. If there's wide variance, large standard deviation, then you have a very loose understanding of what diversity means, and you need to work on that aspect. If it's a tight variance where you believe you have great diversity, then you have a good understanding of diversity in the organization. And if it's at the other end and it's tight, then we've got a problem on our hands.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.